Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Now, if you know anything about me, it's probably that I'm really passionate about preventing slip accidents. So today I've got a session on exactly that. If you've heard me speak before about this, there's quite a lot of new content in this one today. So do give it a go and see if you can learn something. Do go away and use the resources as well. And if you listen in or watch this and you'd like a free copy of my best-selling book all about preventing slip accidents with Slipology, then do drop me a line either on LinkedIn or an email, and we will get a copy out to you ASAP. So let's stop some slips using science. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
So welcome to today's safety roundtable, and we're going to be speaking about a topic very, very close to my heart, as you may well know, which is what we can do to take a more scientific approach to prevent slip accidents from happening. This is a slightly different presentation than ones I've done before on this topic, actually. So if you've heard me present before, I'd be interested in your feedback as to what you think to this slightly different take on things. If you haven't done, then I'll do my best to cover all the key points and make it as engaging as we normally can manage to do in other presentations that we give. Would love to get your questions, comments in the chat if you're joining live. If you're listening to this or watching this in the replay, then do fire into the comments anyway, and I will, as always, try and come back to them and pick them up as we go. So, to start with, just to check that everyone's paying attention, I would love for you guys on the Zoom with me to let me know which of these is a feeling that you have had in the past or you have right now about slip safety. So, four options. Slips, there are easy or simple solutions to solve them. Slips are inexpensive. Slips are inevitable. There's nothing we can do. They're bound to happen. Whatever we do, they're bound to happen. Or slips are not too serious. Let me know in the chat which of these you've ever felt. So we've had a couple of inevitables. I can see inevitable, inevitable. Okay, so inevitable seems to be a popular. Inevitable, easy solutions. Inevitable, easy solutions. Okay, cool. So we're getting some good feedback there. Let me know as well in the chat, just out of interest. Is that how you feel now, or is that how you have felt in the past? But I will make a start. It's useful to have that context, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So let's set the scene with something that happened a few years ago in 2015. So there's a picture on screen here, which is a CCTV image from a co-op store in Cornwall. And what you can see on the screen is on the left-hand side, a yellow sign plonked in the aisle on top of a spillage of water, which was caused by a leaking chiller. And at the top of the screen, you can see a pair of feet and some legs, and they belong to a man called Stanley May. Now, Mr. May, tragically, is about to walk down the aisle. He's going to slip in that puddle of water next to the yellow sign. He is going to fall backwards, bang his head, and then about 48 hours later, sadly, he passes away. So I use this example A, because it's in the public domain. B, because it resulted in a criminal court case where the co-op was fined £400,000. Um, but C, because it is a great example. It sounds bad to say that, but it's a great example from the perspective of learning about some of the things that we do that we perceive as being control measures for slips because of some of the misconceptions that we might have. So I've no doubt that the people in the store were thinking they were following the procedure and they were thinking that, the sign's there and therefore we're covered, we're safe. That's going to protect us and protect our customers. And obviously, as we know from what happened here, the sign is clearly there. We can see it in the CCTV, but it didn't stop the incident. It didn't stop what happened to Mr. May. And it absolutely didn't stop both a civil insurance claim and a criminal uh, prosecution and fine. So, as I say, a good example of where some of the kind of common approaches that people have to this challenge are maybe not quite as robust as we might think. So, the four things I asked you to comment on are synonyms for what I call the slip problem. So, the feelings that people tend to have, in my experience, around slips are that they are slip, SLIP, simple. In other words, the solutions to this are easy. Low cost, they're not very expensive. And actually, even if it does cost us something, our insurance covers us anyway. Impossible to solve, excuse me, and paltry, insignificant. Yeah, you might get the odd sprained wrist, but nothing too serious happens. And obviously, that example, just that one example of what happened to Mr. May, um, that breaks some of these myths. The simple solution was there. The yellow sign didn't stop. It wasn't low cost because it cost them £400,000. Impossible to solve. Well, we can talk about how actually we could have approached that situation differently. But I'm going to run you through today some of the things that are proven to work to reduce these incidents from happening significantly. And obviously, this was far from paltry. So what we actually see is this kind of situation where um, we're doing the basics, right? I'd never go into an organization and they're not doing the basics. So everybody has a risk assessment, everybody has policies and procedures, everybody has spillage control, everybody has the yellow signs, everyone's doing the basics. But the problem with the basics, as shown by this return on effort curve, and this absolutely rings true to me in this world of slip safety. It's low effort, but we're getting a modest result. I'm going to share some data on what that looks like in a minute. Um, the key idea here, really, to take away, guys, is with just a modicum more time, effort, investment. You're already doing so much. There's not that much more you need to do, but you do need to do some additional things. And if you do those additional things, you can have a significantly better impact on your incident rates, your claims defensibility, etc. So yeah, most people, most organizations are down here at the moment. My challenge to you is what can we do to get you up into that green zone where you're in the high performance area? And I'll give you some examples as we go through of things you can do, but also some of the outcomes that people have achieved when they have put in that little bit of extra effort. And I'm not using the word effort in a pejorative sense here. I didn't want to use the word investment um, because that sort of brings in finance only, and it's not just about that. It is an investment, but it's time, cost, focus. That's really where we need to spend a bit more time. So, just quickly, what got me interested in this world of safety and particularly slips? You may have heard me tell this story before, so I won't labour the point too much. But if you cast your mind back to 2012, in the build up to the London Olympics, it was a really exciting time in London. And Sunday, the 13th of May, 2012, was literally the day that changed my life. So the day started quite nicely with a lie-in and a visit to a place called Columbia Road Flower Market in East London, where my girlfriend at the time, who I'm now lucky enough to say is my wife, and I had a lovely lunch and bought some flowers and so on and so forth. We then started heading home. We parked up our car to go to the Sainsbury's in Islington in North London, and we started walking towards the front entrance of the store. And if you're looking on the screen, I was walking pretty much where this chap in the blue jumper is walking in the photograph, and then that's the last thing I remember for several hours. What happened was a car sped around the corner, was going too fast, lost control, mounted the curb, and ploughed into me. So this is a photo of me that afternoon in hospital, and I broke my collarbone and my wrist, and I've got neck damage and various other things. So that got me very much interested in safety. What about slip safety? Well, before this, I was a business consultant and very analytical in the way that I looked at things. And so um, when I started investigating safety, I came across this chart here, which is riddles over time. And it shows that slips, trips, and falls is not only the biggest category of riddles, but it's been very, very, very flat. So I thought to myself, okay, great. I've got this passion for safety. Why don't I work in this area? Because this is the biggest area and therefore one in which I can make a big impact. But it's also flatline, so therefore it seems like people haven't found the solution yet. So to me, that seemed like a great thing. So if we cast our minds back to the co-op incident and we think about the slip problem as I've identified, and we think about that effort curve, we're doing the basics. This is the result we're getting. Year after year after year, we're seeing accident after accident after accident. We're not really improving. It's very, very flat. Lots of people are getting hurt. And so, the challenge is what can we do to break free of this um, and really, really improve? So I'm going to give you 5 steps that you can follow. And this is going to be really focusing in on scientific approaches. So my book, which everybody attending here is going to get a free copy of as a thank you for joining, is called Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology. And the idea of slipology is it's a scientific approach. So the first thing, we need to use data, not assumptions. And just to say, guys, any questions, comments, do fire into the chat. So data, not assumptions. The best place to start with this, in my experience, is with what's called slip testing. So there's a contraption called a pendulum test. It's what's used by the HSE. It's what's used in court cases. So the co-op case that we mentioned at the start, I visited that store after that incident happened, and I did pendulum testing of the floors as part of the well, I suppose it overlapped between the civil and the criminal. Someone from the HSE came in and did pendulum testing as part of this. This is what, if you go to court and it's a question of, was that floor slippery or not? This is what is going to define whether a floor was slippery or not. So it's really important to consider getting this done in your buildings. The output of this test is called a pendulum test value. It's a number, a PTV, and I'll tell you what that means in a second. But here's a quick video of the pendulum test being done. So what you'll see is this chap's going to spray the floor with water. He's then going to release the foot of the pendulum. It's called a pendulum because it swings. It's going to swing from right to left. And as it swings through, it pushes a pointer onto a gauge. And that number on the gauge is the PTV, the slip resistance value. So he's going to spray the floor, swing, pushes the pointer onto the gauge. I'll show it to you a second time. Hopefully what you can see is that this is mimicking that heel strike. So when you're walking along, your heel strikes the floor at this kind of angle. And this machine is designed to mimic that. So as I said, the output of the test is called a pendulum test value. It's a number. And we can correlate, thanks to some work that the HC did, the PTV score with a risk factor. So we're going to be able, by doing this testing, to take a scientific risk-based approach. We're not going to be assuming that a floor is slippery or not slippery. We're going to be actually physically, scientifically testing that floor and then applying a risk factor to it. So if you score 36 or above on the test, and I'm going to say when the floor is wet because slips happen when floors are wet, um, you have a low slip potential and you have a risk exposure of 1 in a million or less. Whereas if you scored a PTV of 24, you've got a high slip potential and a 1 in 20 accident risk exposure. So by doing this testing, we can plot ourselves on this chart and figure out, right, what is our risk exposure in different areas of our building when the floor is dry, when the floor is wet, and therefore we can start to take that risk-based approach. And I would strongly argue that you can't really do a risk assessment for slips if you haven't done this testing, because otherwise you're just guessing, really. You're guessing on the likelihood. So what we want to do is figure out where are we on this, and then obviously if we're down in that red area, what can we do to reduce that risk over time? Oh, sorry if I'm a bit intermittent, guys. Let me see quickly if I can do something to change that. I wonder if my what can I do to change that? I'm not sure actually is the answer. Uh, I wonder if yeah, maybe turning off the camera. Let's try that. Good suggestion from Gemma. Let's see if turning off the camera works. Um, so yeah, we need to take a risk-based approach based on the science. The other benefit of the slip test is, as David Scott says, who's an insurance claims lawyer, if you have compliant slip test data, you should expect to defend that claim. So by having this scientific evidence, we're not only reducing our risk, but we're also helping to defend ourselves should anything bad happen. Because obviously, even with a 1 in a million risk, it's possible that somebody could slip. So here's an example of this. We worked with Euston train station. This was many, many years ago now. We slip tested the floors in the station, and on average, when they were wet, the floors were achieving PTVs of under 24. So they had a high slip potential when they were wet. We then put in place a different cleaning regime in the station, and we assessed that and then monitored that with the slip testing. And over time, they were achieving PTVs in excess of 36. And then what they found as a result of that, taking that scientific data-led approach, was that they saw 30% fewer or more than 30% fewer slip accidents year on year. And this was over several months. This was actually published in an industry, a rail industry magazine as well by Network Rail, not by us. And this was their data. So, taking that scientific approach, even in a place as busy as Euston train station, can have a significant effect on the number of people slipping over. Second thing to do, second step, is to apply the chimes model. So, as part of the book, I decode why slips happen. And there are six key reasons, six key things that we can control. And I put these into a model which I call chimes. I'll run you through what that means in a minute. But essentially, when I've gone into organizations and found that they're doing well, it's because they're doing stuff in all of these areas. When I get called in and they're kind of in trouble mode, shall we say, and things have gone wrong, and we start to explore chimes, we find typically that they're not doing much, or they're just focusing on maybe one of these areas. So we need to have this kind of holistic approach. And within each area of chimes, there are scientific measurements you can make to assess and monitor the inputs, your activity levels that will drive the outcome of incidents. Okay. So I'll run through what chimes means. The first area is contamination, that's C. So a floor that's perfectly clean, perfectly dry is not going to be slippery. But a floor that has contamination on it can become very slippery indeed. So, what contamination do we have? Where's it coming from? How much of it is there? How long does it take to build up? How much of it can we withstand before it becomes an issue? All of these questions are things we should consider under the C in chimes. H is for heel, that's about footwear. Now, obviously, we can't control footwear for members of the public in most cases, but we absolutely can control footwear for members of staff. One of the challenges around footwear is that not all safety shoes are created equally. So you might have a piece of footwear that you perceive to be a safety shoe, or it may even be effective as a safety shoe in certain areas of a building, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be, excuse me, effective in another area. So when it comes to footwear, you've got the material, the tread pattern, and wear and tear are the three key things to look at. Individual is all about the human factors. So here there is evidence to show that if you're older, then you're more likely to slip and fall, because obviously we can slip and not fall by self-addressing. Obviously, if you're older as well, you're more likely to get hurt, and that recovery is going to be more costly. But here we're thinking a lot about activities. So if we are pushing, pulling, twisting, turning, if we're carrying things, all of these activities make us more likely to slip. So therefore, what can we do to mitigate those activities from happening? What can we do around education? What can we do around signage? Bearing in mind, as mentioned at the start, that the sign alone is not an adequate control. That was, in fact, that was the exact phrase that Cornwall Council used in that case. Signage alone is not an adequate control. M is for maintenance, and this splits into three: change of use. So if we reconfigure buildings, wear and tear, things will change over time, and cleaning. And I'll give you an example of cleaning later, but suffice to say, cleaning is a massive control measure to mitigate slip risk. Environment, so this is the weather, but it's also entrance matting, steps and stairs, ramps and slopes, noise levels, lighting levels. All of these things fall under environment. So how can we control those better? And then S is surface, so the floor. Some floors are more slippery than other floors, just as some footwear is more slippery than other footwear. So what we ideally want to see is a holistic approach where we consider all of these things. We have scientific inputs that we monitor in all of these areas. And that, in my experience, is what drives good outcomes. Now, we have assessed several thousand sites using the Chimes model, and this is the average performance across all sorts of sectors, different countries, etc. So the average building is doing well on footwear, and they're doing well on maintenance, and they're doing less well on surface, the floor, and on individual, on the human factors. So if we were invited to come and look at your organization and this was your profile, the first thing that I would say to you is, right, what can we do to improve performance in individual and surface and get those to kind of an even keel? It's an obvious way to approach this kind of profile. But you might not be average, and there is a free tool we've developed called the Slip Prevention Scorecard, where it takes about 3.5 minutes, and you can actually answer some questions and assess your own Chimes profile. So it'll give you a score based on your answers for contamination, heel, individual, maintenance, environment, and surface, plus an overall score. So as an action point from today, I'm going to mention this later as well, but it's definitely worth going and doing that scorecard and seeing where you are, because that will give you the insight in terms of where you need to focus your time and effort to go higher up on that curve that we spoke about earlier. If you want to do that, the URL is scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk. And I'm going to talk in a minute about taking a zonal approach, but what you can do with chimes is actually apply chimes to different environments or different areas within your building. So here on screen, you can see some analysis that we did for a pub company around washrooms. So we went through all of the different chimes and we figured out, right, to what extent are they controllable for you in this area? And therefore, what actions should you take as a result of this to mitigate the risk as much as you reasonably can? So yeah, step three, zoning your risks. Now, um, one of the things that frustrates me when I go in to meet with people and I ask them to show me what they're doing currently around slip safety is I tend to find, not always, but I tend to find um, some policies, procedures, risk assessments that are across the board. So I remember interviewing on the podcast uh, a barrister, and I said to him, are you better to have a health and safety policy that is all singing, all dancing, hugely detailed, world class, but no proof of actually doing it? Or are you better off to have something that is um, sort of one piece of paper, very high level, but you can actually show that you've done every single thing that it said? And he said you're better off with point two. So I'm not saying we need to go overboard in terms of detail, but what I would say is, and another point he made is, it needs to be site specific. Um, and so if you've got a business with multiple sites, and you've got one policy, procedure, risk assessment covering everything, that's not really cutting the mustard. At a site level, um, you need to think about taking a zonal approach to slip risk. And I would suggest it's something like a 95%, 5% split. 95% of your floors are very unlikely to ever get wet or contaminated. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what you've got in place, um, as long as you can deal with spillages and try and keep those floors clean and dry. But 5% of your floor areas in an average building are foreseeably or regularly or constantly or whichever word you want to use, but it's foreseeable that these floors are going to be wet or otherwise contaminated, and therefore they need to be safe in the condition that is expected. So for those 5% of areas, you need to be doing a much more robust, detailed, scientific risk assessment versus the 95%. So really focus in on those areas. That's where slips happen, not in the 95%. No problem, Olivia. Hope you enjoy the book, and you obviously can watch the replay as well. So if we cast our mind back to slip testing, one of the misconceptions people have about slip testing is, well, if I get a slip test done, excuse me, and it shows my floor is slippery, then I need to do something about it. And that's not necessarily true, okay? So we need to overlay the slip testing data with the likelihood of a floor being wet or contaminated. Because if you've got a floor that's very, very slippery when it's wet, but it's in an area that's incredibly unlikely to ever get wet or contaminated, then that's fine. That's not a problem. However, if you've got an area that is foreseeably wet, so a swimming pool, a toilet, a kitchen, external areas, entrance areas, if you don't have enough matting, shower rooms, production areas, potentially depending on what you're making. These areas, if you've got a slip testing score that is not 36 plus, then that is something you need to do to address, because that is a problem because you've overlaid the risk of a slip based on the scientific assessment and the risk of a slip based on whether it's actually going to be in the condition for a slip to happen. And if those two things merge and it sort of produces a red flag, absolutely you need to act on that, but you don't necessarily need to act in those other areas. Very much taking the zonal approach is the way to go. So let's just build on a point I made about matting. There's a photo on screen here of a train station, and they have quite a lot of matting, about 3 meters of matting at the entrance. But as you can see from this photograph, on a wet day, the floor beyond the matting is very, very wet indeed. So why does matting exist? Matting exists to dry and clean the foot before it goes inside the building. And there are two reasons for that. One is to stop dirt getting inside, and one is obviously to stop slips. So one thing I hear a lot is, well, we've got an entrance mat, so we're cool, we're fine. But the problem with that is, you need to think about the size of your matting, the material that the matting is made of, and how well maintained that matting is to see whether it's actually effective or not. Just on the size point, HSE and the Entrance Flooring Association put out some guidance about mat sizes, and they said that if you have a peak traffic flow of 400 people per hour, so think of, a school, a hospital, an office building, um, a convenience store, shopping centre, then you should have 6 to 7 meters of built-in matting. Now, if you go around the country and you look at building entrances, it's very, very rare you're going to see 6 to 7 meters of matting. So therefore, if you don't have that matting, you need to be thinking about, right, is that floor beyond the matting safe because it's likely to get wet? So stand inside on a wet day and just see, is the floor getting wet beyond the matting? If it is, then that floor should be within your 5% of areas that is foreseeably wet, and you should be trying to do something more to mitigate the slip risk. And cleaning, I mentioned cleaning as a control measure. There's a photo on screen here of a shopping centre. If you walked in as a customer and you saw this floor, you'd probably think it was pretty clean. It's not until we cleaned a patch of this floor that it became apparent that the floor was consistently dirty. So again, don't assume. And you need to think about cleaning zonally as well. So you're going to have different contaminants, different risks of uh, additional contaminants in different areas of your building. So you really want to make sure that the cleaning regime is scientifically proven to be fit for purpose and that it's not making your floor A, grubby, B, less hygienic, but C, importantly, in the context of today, more slippery. The fourth point I wanted to talk about was verifying controls scientifically. So there's three examples here of floors which the perception was they were safe or slip resistant, anti-slip, whichever word you want to use, but actually they weren't. First one here is an example of a ramp in a hospital setting. It was chosen because it's checker plating, the kind of metal grating that you see a lot on the backs of lorries and places like that. It's got a texture to it, clearly. So therefore, people thought it must be safe. Actually, this checker plating is often very slippery when it's wet, and this one was in this particular case. So it looks anti-slip, but it never was. Second example is from a production facility that does spice blending. When you walk into this place, you look at the floor and you think it's going to be a slip-resistant floor. What's actually happened over the years is, no problem, William, thanks for joining, is that the floor has worn away. So if you go under the racking or next to the skirting boards, the floor is very, very rough, like sandpaper. But if you stand in the middle of the floor is very, very smooth. So it looks like it should be slip resistant, but it isn't because it's worn away. And then a third example here is in a leisure centre where the perception of the general manager was we're fine because we've got an anti-slip tile in our changing rooms, and they did have an anti-slip tile in the changing rooms, but the problem here was going back to that prior point, it wasn't being cleaned effectively, and therefore it was really quite slippery. Once it was cleaned, it was safe. So This would be a floor that the perception would be, it looks safe, it looks anti-slip, but because it's contaminated, it isn't. So we've got to be verifying how effective our control measures are. We can't be looking at stuff and just assuming that it's safe. An example I'll give you is during COVID. So what happened in COVID? Everybody went mad doing fogging, total waste of time in most cases. The problem with COVID was if it was on a surface, then it could infect somebody. So to uh, prevent that risk, you needed to clean the COVID off the surface. Okay. So removed off the surface. What people ended up doing, a lot of people, was going around misting all this stuff everywhere. And all it was doing was laying on top of the COVID. The COVID was still there. Once it was displaced by somebody touching, you know, it was back. And so there was a lot of kind of safety theatre or safety washing going on. So we've got to try and avoid that at all costs in all areas, but definitely in this area of slip safety. Gareth's put a question about anti-slip floors. Are there any recommendations for retesting the slip resistance based on annual foot traffic and expected wear of the anti-slip properties? It's a great question, Gareth. So, um, what I would do initially is I would probably test them after a year, and I would assess to see what. Well, firstly, I would test them out of the box on installation to make sure that they were actually anti-slip, right? So that's the first thing. But I would then probably test annually, just to see what changes, if any, were happening. And then after, maybe a couple of years, if you were finding very, very consistent results, then you might push that testing back to say every 2 years, or and you could even continue pushing it back slightly. What will happen is eventually there will be some changes. So, what to avoid at all costs is doing no testing, and no monitoring. So you definitely don't want to be in that position. But equally, there's no point being over the top and testing for testing's sake. So, test it initially, maybe more frequently, and then push that back once you've got more clarity and certainty, that the floor is maintaining at a good level over time. And the last point I want to make is about building the business case. So this is really, really important. And I have a phrase that I call profit from safety. So my firm belief is that if you look at a high performing, highly profitable business, they are going to be good at safety. And if you look at a business that is bad at safety, they're not going to be very profitable. So I believe there's an intrinsic link between safety and profitability. And I'm planning to write a book about this actually. Um, I'll give you an example of this, and then we'll talk a bit about how to make a business case. So we worked with a leisure club operator a few years ago, and they were having one slip insurance claim per week. Okay, so they had 100 plus sites, so it's not a small number of sites, but they were having one slip claim per week. Um, and we ran them through our process of assessing the risk and all of that other stuff, right? But the outcomes of this were really interesting, and I kind of encapsulated these in something I call the five Ps. So you've got protection, performance, profit, progress, purpose, and these are the outcomes I think of good safety and risk management. So if we run through that sort of pyramid of the five Ps in the context of this example, so uh, because they did what they needed to do to mitigate the risk, the first headline is their slip insurance claims fell from one per week to one per month. So that's a decline, a huge decline in claims. Now, it's not zero. Um, we can talk about zero harm, and we have talked about zero harm on the podcast before, but zero maybe isn't realistic. if you've got areas that are wet, even if you've got that 1 in a million risk, there is still a risk. Um, so safety headline level, massive, massive reduction. Um, so they had certainty of that level of protection, right? What about performance? Well, actually, because they were taking the steps they needed to do to make their club safer, they were actually seeing other operational benefits as well. So, for example, their member feedback went through the roof because their floors were cleaner, because they were cleaning them more effectively to keep them safe. They were cleaner. They were seeing fewer members leaving due to um, complaints about cleanliness. They were finding it easier to attract more members. They were saving time with uh, dealing with incidents and in lots of other ways as well, operationally. What about profit? Well, just by the claims differential alone, if you consider the average claim at this time was about £10,000, they saved in the six figures and added to their profitability by driving decreased risk, but also those performance elements drove higher profit as well. So safety linked into profit, but then after that, what were the benefits in terms of progress and purpose? Progress to me is all about, right, we've improved this business in such a way that we can now think about expansion or developing new products or whatever it might be, some kind of growth within the business. And they absolutely did that from a safety perspective because the safety team freed up huge amounts of time dealing with slips that they could then put into other areas of safety. So there was definite progress for the business in the realm of safety. And then purpose. This was a quite mission-led business anyway. Um, and just at a high level, the safety team were able to spend, I think they spent about 20% extra time on the kind of charitable stuff that they did as an organization because of the benefits of getting this stuff right. So that's just one example there of where actually, you can build a business case off the back of being better at slip safety. Here's what I'd say though. What we need to do is get away from uh, luck, get away from past performance because past performance doesn't necessarily indicate future results. And if we instead focus in on the risk and we think about, for example, a slip test, right? What does that data tell us is the actual risk scientifically of our floors rather than, well, we haven't had an accident for a while? What does insurance data tell us about the sector that we're in or slips generally? So I'll give you a statistic. AXA Insurance in 2018 spent £80 million, 80, on slip claims, and they spent £30 million on manual handling claims. So slips were 2.5 times the size of manual handling. Um, how much effort are you putting into slips versus manual handling, as an example? Let's think about data from our industry, what's going on, and benchmark ourselves in our industry. Let's think about accident data at a high level, all those RIDDOR statistics that we saw and other data as well, and use this to build the case that actually, even though we may have been fortunate and we haven't had slips in the past, that doesn't mean they're not going to happen in the future. And then when it comes to what's the ROI here, well, we need to think about the human costs, the insurance costs. We've seen insurers give quite significant reductions in premiums where organizations have worked on slip safety. We've also seen insurers paying for us to do surveys and tests and risk quantification and so on and so forth, reputation, and then the time as well. So think about those costs and putting those two things together is how we can build that business case. So let's start summing up and then happy to take any more questions and give you some action points to take away as well. So I really want to get this point across. I've given you some examples, but you can absolutely stop slips from happening. So whether it's in the leisure sector, 85% reduction in claims volumes, that was the case study I just gave you, whether it's in a shopping centre where we managed to help the client to eliminate their accidents for over 2 years, uh, whether it's in train stations, whether it's in restaurants, um, whether it's in education facilities, whether it's in hotel bathrooms, you absolutely can make a massive difference in slip accidents or incidents, injuries, and claims. So the starting point is, it's definitely possible to make a big, big difference. So what we need to remember are that slips are scientific, they're serious, and they are stoppable. So the three S's: serious, scientific, stoppable. Why should you care? What's in it for you? Um, so if you can go away and start to put in place these scientific measures, what that's going to give you is really strong confidence and certainty that you're managing the risk. So if you're moving away from assumption and instead you're relying on science, then you know you've got the facts to prove that you're reducing that risk. So it's going to take a weight off your shoulders and certainly allow you to sleep more easily at night. But in the longer run, based on all the organizations we've worked with over the years, uh, less people or fewer people, sorry, getting hurt, less harm, um, more time for you, more ability to be strategic in your safety management and think about other areas of safety, and of course, lower costs. So here's what to do next. A couple of things. Firstly, thank you for coming and joining me today. We're going to be in contact with you and we're going to send you a copy of the Prevent Slip Accidents with Slipology book, Amazon #1 bestseller in safety books and in insurance books. If you are listening to this, watching this, joining us, however you are on the replay and you'd like a free book, just drop a comment or send me a message or an email or something. Happily send you a copy of the book. So go away and read the book and delve into this subject in a bit more detail. Secondly, I'd really recommend doing the scorecard. Oops, I've skipped ahead there a bit. Self-assess your building. Scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk. It takes 3.5 minutes. It's very quick. It's very intuitive, very easy. Um, it's going to give you that roadmap to say, right, currently we're doing pretty well. We've got these basics in place, like I said at the start. But here are the areas where we can improve. And then it's going to kind of signpost you to how to improve in those areas. So I'd really recommend doing the scorecard. If you want some additional help, just to be clear about how we can help, we do three things. We do diagnostic work, so we help people to assess chimes. We go in and do the slip testing for you and give you that scientific assessment. And we pull together recommendations, testing results into reports, and then that will give you a much more detailed risk assessment and roadmap as to where to go. We then do solving. So we get involved in doing anti-slip treatment so we can make any floor type safe even when it's wet, so it'll pass that pendulum test. We also do deep cleaning as well, where floors feel impossible to clean and they're unhygienic and slippery. We can solve that too. And then we do maintenance. So we typically work with clients on an ongoing basis to ensure that that asset that is now safe stays that way over time. So that's it from me in terms of the content. Hopefully, what you have got from this today is that I'm very passionate about this topic. Hopefully, you agree. I know a little bit about it. And I'm really trying to bring this fresh approach and very much a scientific approach to this age-old problem. And I suppose I'm trying to challenge you to say, look, doing the basics isn't enough. You need to go that little bit further. But if you do go that bit further, and it doesn't take much extra time, effort, cost, then you should have that feeling of confidence, that feeling of certainty that you are managing your risks really well, world class, best practice, high performance, all of that great stuff is more than achievable in this area. So, really encourage you to take some of the lessons from today, implement some of the ideas, and I'm sure you will get some good results from it. So I've got a couple of minutes left. If anybody wants to ask any more questions, thank you for all the comments to say thank you in the chat. But if anybody does have any more questions, then feel free to let me know. I've got one here asking about anti-slip treatments. So essentially, if you think about a swimming pool, because it's an obvious example of a floor that's going to get wet, right? Uh, if you installed around the poolside a glass tile on the floor, a smooth glass tile, that's going to be pretty slippery, right, when it gets wet. Um, if you're in a situation where, and hopefully you don't have glass on the floor around a poolside, but if you're in a situation where you've got a floor that's already there and it's kind of too slippery floor for the environment, for the area that it's in, bearing in mind, as we say, the slip resistance value score and the likelihood of it getting wet or contaminated, then we've got all sorts of different sort of high-tech ways of making that floor safe so that you don't have to replace it, you don't have to close, you don't have to invest huge amounts of capital. We can come in, our team can come in overnight, discreetly, work out of hours, have your floor ready for use in the morning, and you can solve that problem without the massive cost and inconvenience of having to replace the floor. So that's kind of how the anti-slip treatments work. And another question here, slip testing. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'd recommend, any new floor that you're installing, definitely get a slip test done. As mentioned in response to Gareth, annually monitor the slip resistance of floors over a period of time until such time that you've got confidence that it's going well, and then you can maybe push that out a little bit longer. After any incident, you should get a slip test done. If you're changing a cleaning contractor, if you're changing a cleaning method, um, and I suppose if you feel like anything's changed, and you feel, you perceive that the floor is just a bit slippery, it's definitely worth getting a test done. And do reach out, and I can put you in touch with the right member of my team that can arrange that for you. Question from Catherine. What are my thoughts on anti-slip bath mats as a control measure in hotel rooms, etc.? I was having this conversation yesterday, funny enough. So the the pro is that a bit like a sign, if you put a sign out, it might stop somebody from slipping. A bath mat might stop somebody from slipping. The con is, or the cons are, is that a really robust way of mitigating the risk? Um, should it be the case that you, as the operator of the building, are relying on your guest to do something to keep themselves safe, or should you have a more robust environment in terms of safety in which the guest can just relax and be safe enough already, if that makes sense? In terms of bathtubs and shower trays, we've done a number of hotels over the years where we do the treatments on the floors, but also the bathtubs and shower trays. That's a bit more of a fail-safe, a bit more of a scientifically proven way of keeping those environments safer. Um, so that's definitely an option. Um, and it's also going to be a bit more robust in terms of like defensibility. Was the we provided a mat? Well, was it used? Was it not used? Etc. Etc. Whereas we did the treatment and it was proven, with pendulum testing to be safe. That definitely is a bit more of a robust way of doing it. The other challenge with matting, whether it's in a bathtub or a shower tray or around a swimming pool or in a food production area or a kitchen, is that these mats, well, there's two things actually. Sometimes the mats themselves are quite slippery. So they're actually not much less slippery than the floors that they're on. Again, there's a perception that they're less slippery, but are they? Not necessarily. And the other thing is that they require quite a lot of cleaning and maintenance. So they are, in many ways, a little bit sort of unhygienic. And so that's something you need to weigh up as well. So hopefully that's given you a balanced view, Catherine, on that one. Okay, great. Well, it looks like that's it in terms of questions. So thank you for joining today. Catherine, if you want to pick that up with me in more detail, drop me a line, by the way, and we can always arrange a quick call. Yeah, thanks for joining today. I hope you've learned something. I hope you have gone away from this with a slightly different perception around slip safety and a desire to improve and to do so scientifically. If there's anything that I or my team can do to help you on that journey, then do reach out and let us know. But with that, I'll say thank you, and I will look forward to seeing you again on another session coming up soon.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.